Hi, this is Dr. Sean Richardson, and welcome to the High Performance Life. And today we're going to be talking about a topic that all of us have to deal with, sometimes daily or often daily. And it's really about changing how we respond to this thing that is going to make all the difference for you in your life, whether you're talking about your personal, your business, or if you're a competitive athlete in your sport. These are all areas that I work in. And that topic is failure. So I want you to think about something that you've had to deal with lately, a setback, a failure, a negative experience from a not so good outcome, whether it was something in your personal life, maybe something to do with your health or your fitness or other aspect of your personal life, maybe relationships. Or maybe in your business, you might have a sales team or a project team and you've had a deal fall through or you've lost the bid on a major project. And if you're a competitive athlete, what about your sport? I work a lot with footballers and I know that it can get to them when, say, they miss a kick at goal if you're a forward, or maybe a goal gets kicked on you if you are a defender. These are the sorts of things, either small, immediate failures, or maybe bigger ones like that project team with the business. Or maybe there's something in your personal life that's either small or big. I want you to think about one of those failures recently for you. And today what we're going to do is we're going to unpack, first of all, what are some of the typical ways that our brain and body respond to failure, and what does that lead to? And then what are some of the things that we can do to respond differently? And fundamentally, what we're here to talk about is what I call flipping the script on failure. There are ways you can respond to failure that completely change how it affects your life in a positive way. So let's get into that. Starting with, what is what we might call our brain's autopilot response to failure? Because there are things that your brain does predictably when you face a setback, a negative outcome, or a failure. And there are 4 columns we're going to look at: feeling, meaning, action, and outcome. So what is it like for you? And you might relate to this, so think about your example. The most predictable thing that the brain does when you face a failure is it interprets failure as something potentially threatening. So it triggers the amygdala. It triggers parts of your brain that create some level of physiological arousal. We might experience it as anxiety. It could be fear. It could be anger. It could be upset. It could be frustration. These are very normal emotions that you're going to experience when you faced a failure. It could be upset with yourself. And they very quickly, on autopilot, lead your brain to making an interpretation of them, because you see, feelings are a signal that your brain needs to interpret to figure out how you can then act on them. But the typical and predictable ways that our brain interprets these feelings when we're aware that we failed at something is something along the lines of, I'm not good enough. Or perhaps, I wasn't up for it today, or there's something wrong with me, or I couldn't do that. So these are the autopilot responses, and they're built into the system. Unless there's something very obvious from the outside that I can't control, typically negative feelings when I fail at something lead to negative self-assessment. However, if you're feeling negative and you've got a negative meaning that's attached to that, and that's all on autopilot, it's very likely to lead, in terms of your response or your next actions, to a drop in focus and effort. And often this is subconscious. So you don't mean to drop your focus or effort. It's just going to happen. So you're focusing your effort on your next step. So if you're a salesperson on a sales team and you've just lost a deal or a bid didn't go through, your next project that you're working on, or maybe it's the next moment, if you've got to make more sales calls in that day, it can be difficult to jump on that phone with a lot of energy. You might pick up the phone to make that call to the next client, but your energy is going to be lowered. You're going to maybe not deliver along your sales script or your sales process as solidly as possible with that drop in effort and focus. So your actions are less effective. But when we have a drop in effectiveness because of that drop in effort and focus, what's more likely to be the future outcome? We're going to have potentially more failures in the future because of this autopilot response. The feeling, the meaning, the impact on our next actions is more likely, therefore, to lead to more negative outcomes. And more negative outcomes then just send us back into this cycle of feeling upset, triggering those fight or flight, physiological arousal, negative emotions, which lead to more negative meaning. And this can become a vicious cycle. Now, a lot of people understand that they don't want to get caught in these cycles. And a step up from getting caught in this cycle is to say, I'm going to put the failures behind me. I'm just going to leave them behind. I'm going to forget about them. And I'm going to focus on what's next. And that's a positive. That's not a bad way to go about it. But what we find oftentimes that happens with this is that doesn't necessarily, that might temporarily work. I've put the failures behind me. I've forgotten about them. But then they might come back to haunt me later. They might get stuck in my head, or when I'm under pressure and I have to perform in the future, there's a memory there of something negative about the failure. And even though I think I've gotten over it, it comes out and affects me again, and it leads to future failure. So even though if you're good at temporarily putting it aside or putting it behind you, and you can focus in the next minute, there is an alternative response to failure. And it's something to do with this phrase up here, flip the script. Well, you can not just say bounce back from a failure or put it behind you. You can actually transform your failure experiences into something that help you bounce forward, that help you grow, that help you get better. So failure becomes an opportunity to get even better at something. And it's not something that we fear in the future or we try to avoid. It's something we lean into, that we might be thinking, how do I actually practice dealing with failure? Because if I can do that, I'm going to get good at that. Remember, failure is one of those inevitabilities in life. We're going to face it everywhere. The only way you can get good at dealing with failure is practicing facing failure. So failure is not a bad thing if we see it differently. And this is where we want to get into what can you do differently. And what I've learned as a performance psychologist and working with business people and competitive athletes and people in their personal lives to achieve their biggest goals is that we can engage a different part of our brain. And that part of our brain is in what Daniel Kahneman in his book Thinking Fast and Slow calls System 2. It's a deliberate, conscious, innovative, creative part of our brain. It takes a bit of effort to use that part of your brain, but it can override that, what he calls System 1, which is the instinctual autopilot part of our brain. So how do we do this? Let's step through this now so the next time you face a failure, you can start practicing how to flip the script on that failure to turn it not just from something that was a bad experience to get over, but something that you look forward to the next time from the idea that it's an opportunity to learn, to grow, to get better at what you do. So how do we do that? Well, the very first thing that we need to do is actually not to block those out, not just to get over these things, not just to get over the initial feelings and the meanings our brain makes. The first thing that we need to do to flip the script on failure is actually to acknowledge, validate, and normalize our autopilot responses. So if you catch yourself in an autopilot response to a setback, a negative outcome, a failure, it's not to try to just brush over those feelings. It's actually to face them. Our feelings are there for a reason. If we don't face them, we don't acknowledge them, we don't validate them, and we just squash them away or we brush them aside, they're still in the system. They're still in our memory system. We have this thing, we could call it emotional memory. Everything gets recorded in our brain. They're still there. So we actually want to face them, because the only way that we can deliberately change our outcomes and our actions is by paying attention to what our brain is trying to tell us. It's trying to tell us that didn't feel very good. You don't want to go there again. You don't want to experience this again. And you want to be able to face your brain, in a sense, those signals, and say, okay, I'm going to decide what I do with those signals, with those negative emotions. I can only decide that if I face them and acknowledge them. So I'm going to say to myself, hey, it's okay to feel upset, to feel anxious, to feel angry or frustrated. And it's pretty normal for those to trigger thoughts like, I don't feel like I'm good enough, or maybe I wasn't capable today. And that's all normal. And we want to validate. So I want to say, hey, brain, it's okay. It's normal that you feel those things. I don't like it, but there's not something wrong with your brain function that you thought these things. However, by doing that, by acknowledging, validating, normalizing, you're going to give your brain a little bit of space. It will relax a little bit. It'll go, okay, thank you. You heard me. And that gives you the space to actually flip the script, to change the meaning, is to deliberately choose a different way of thinking about this experience, about that situation, either personal, business, or sport, where you had that setback. So instead of saying the failure means that I'm not good enough, or I wasn't up for it today, or things always go against me, I'm going to say failure is an opportunity. I want to feel energized by it to some extent. I want to convince myself that, hey, this is my chance. That was feedback. It was an opportunity. It was feedback, or perhaps even a reminder to check in on my process, to check in and say, okay, did I follow my sales process? Did I get something wrong that was just a behavior that I could change for next time? Maybe I was getting everything right and I'm still learning and I just need more practice and more repetition. So that's where failure is an opportunity. Hey, if I fail, but I did it really well, I gave 100% effort to what I was doing, I followed my process, whether it was kicking for goal, whether it was my script or my presentation in front of a client, I know that I gave my best to that. Then what I've done is I've actually practiced that process really well in the face of failure. And by doing that, I'm actually going to learn from it. I'm going to learn, does my process need to be tweaked? Do I just need to repeat more because I'm learning? But what it's telling me is I change my meaning. It's not that there's something wrong with me. I'm going to say I'm learning, I'm growing. Failure is an opportunity to keep doing that. I actually don't like the feeling of failure, but there's a part of me that might even say I'm thankful or grateful that I had that failure because it's given me a chance to bounce back. What happens the next time in my life when I have something that's even a bigger deal and I'm worried about failure? And I've already said to myself, I know that I can, no matter what the outcome is here, I can bounce forward from failure. I can get better from it. So when I change the meaning of it, I see it as an opportunity to grow, to learn, to get better at my craft, my business, my sport. So the power here of deliberately choosing response is to come up with meanings that help you, that make it so even though failure itself might not be pleasant in that moment, it's going to lead to an actual increase in focus, perhaps an increase in effort. And it's going to increase the effectiveness of your actions. So I get on that call, right? I'm going to have some more energy. I'm going to look at my script. I'm going to look at my process. I get on that call with that next client that I want to engage with for the next deal. And I've got a bit more energy around this. I'm reminding myself that failure, I did fail, but that failure is a reminder to bring my energy, to bring my focus and my effort to my key actions. When I can do that, I'm going to give myself the best chance in that next opportunity to do well. And even if I fail at it, if I keep repeating that, the results are going to come over time. So if failure can actually lead to an increase in focus, an increase in effort, I'm actually building a habit of turning failure into something that makes me better. And over time, the results will take care of themselves. And it becomes a self-fulfilling, positive self-fulfilling prophecy where that can actually lead to more positive emotions. I'll put a little positive sign here the next time around. And what you get here is this has got to be practiced. A deliberate chosen response the first time you do it is like first learning to swing a golf club if you've never played golf before, and I don't play golf. Or it's the first time that you stand in front of a customer and do a pitch. You haven't done it before. You're a beginner and you might not get it right, but the more you practice this thing, the less you have to think about it. Eventually, you want this, that flipped script, different focus to become your autopilot response, your habit. And that can happen over time. So in your life, you could go through life looking at failures and setbacks and negative outcomes as things to be upset about, and which feed a story of not being good enough or other meanings that are not helpful. And if you do that, there's nothing wrong with you. You're just being a normal human being. But you could choose to intervene and think differently about your failures. Look to flip the script. Turn the meaning into something positive. I'm growing. I'm learning. There's opportunity here. There's a feedback for me to tweak my process. And those failures mean that I can increase my focus and my effort on my next actions. When you get this process working and building it into a habit, you start to see the positive outcomes. And failure becomes something in your life that you don't fear, but something you grow from and you get better from. And in a way, if you're anything competitive in sport or in business, you're going to take advantage and get way ahead of your competitors. Because if they're not doing this, you're growing at double, triple the rate that they are. Make sure if you like the video, hit the subscribe button, jump onto the YouTube channel, check out some of our other videos, look us up online at our website, www.energyhealthinc.com. Reach out, send me an email, put your comments in the comment section, and we'll definitely see you next time. This is Dr. Sean Richardson, The High Performance Life, Energy Health Inc. Thank you very much.